This is the Bret Easton Ellis Podcast.
Thanks for downloading and listening to the Bret Easton Ellis Podcast. I appreciate your support, and I really appreciate you linking to Amazon through my show page at podcast1.com. And let me tell you why. Every time you link to Amazon through my page and decide to do some shopping, Amazon gives us a commission to help keep the show going. It won't cost you anything extra. There are no additional fees. You still get the same Amazon prices and service, and it's easy to do. Just go to podcast1.com, click on the Bret Easton Ellis page, and then click on the Amazon button. You might want to bookmark it while you're there, which will make it even easier to access. So again, thanks for helping me keep the Bret Easton Ellis Podcast going for you for free. Right now, it's part one of my conversation with Marilyn Manson, where we talk about bullying, the Hunger Games, rehab at promises, attention spans, Harry Potter, and spring breakers. Marilyn Manson doesn't come out during the day, which is why we're sitting here at the Podcast One Studios in Beverly Hills at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, late in November, and why I'm missing a new episode of The Shahs of Sunset on Bravo. The building we're in is deserted. The parking garage is closed. I think we might be the only people in the building right now. Outside, Maple Drive is completely empty. There's no one out on the street surrounding the building we're in. And I'm having a little tequila, as I'm prone to do at this hour, and Marilyn is having a little absinthe, which I think he's prone to do as well. And we're going to talk about movies, though I know Brian, anything you prefer? Sir. Suggested that we just base our entire conversation around Kanye West earlier today. But I also want to preface this by saying to those of you who complained that I talk too much during the Kanye podcast, the Bret Easton Ellis Podcast is not a traditional Q&A. It's a conversation between me and whoever would like to come in and talk that I find interesting. So for those of you who are somewhat turned off by the idea that I talk a lot during these podcasts, this is just a warning. Okay, one of the last times you and I saw each other was at the Los Angeles premiere of Spring Breakers this last March. Yep. And when I heard you agree to come on the Bret Easton Ellis Podcast, I was thinking about that movie. And since I know you're very interested in film, you've appeared in many, and you've expressed an interest in making them as well, I was thinking lately about my reaction, not really to Spring Breakers, but to the notion of what a screenplay means and what part it plays in any film. James Franco recently said, yes, I'm quoting James Franco, I have no problem with that, and I agree with what he said. He said, the screenplay is not the be-all, end-all for a movie. But thinking about Spring Breakers, I do think that's a film that would have benefited from a fleshed-out, narratively coherent script. And look, a lot of movies could benefit from that as well. But what a lot of movies don't have is Harmony Korine's unique eye and his sensibility. And the setup for Spring Breakers is great. And the look of Spring Breakers is great. And you're put in a kind of anticipatory state when you start watching the movie. And even when James Franco gives it a comic jolt, the movie just kind of drifts away. And I remember being fairly disappointed, more disappointed than I am in much worse movies, because I kept thinking that with these characters and this setup, a more forcefully announced dramatic structure with scenes that actually play out instead of just like a montage could have made Spring Breakers great. And I remember we were sitting next to each other with our respective partners in the Cinerama Dome in Hollywood. And because of how chaotic things, I think, were, we didn't get a chance to talk afterwards. You may respond to this in any way you want, including ignoring me.
Oh, no. Okay. The one thing that I remember most about Spring Breakers, why we didn't get to talk, might have been because when I went to the after party and I was hanging out with Gucci Mane, who I later then that night, about 4 a.m, got a call from him to go in the studio to record a song called Getting Pussies Wet. And I did that night. But in between then, when I was leaving the party, I managed to take with me some tactical smoke bombs, the kind of used for like with paintball games. And I tossed it, and I didn't know until I got home, and I saw it on TMZ that like 4 or 5 fire trucks showed up afterwards. But it did diffuse the paparazzi enough to get out of there. But when I was thinking about the movie, if I had to, well, first of all, I agree with a lot of what you said, and the visual style. I believe Benoit Dubois.
Yes, great DP. Great.
He actually DP'd a short trailer I did 6 years ago for a screenplay that I wrote called Phantasmagoria about sort of the schizophrenic aspect of Lewis Carroll, which and I was with Roger Avery also at the Spring Breakers thing, and Roger has taken that screenplay and is going to reinvigorate it. And I was having a conversation with Roger about how he thought that the movie would have panned out better, and I think Roger being a great screenwriter, that if the Selena Gomez character didn't just suddenly disappear, and if there was sort of we both would have liked that if James Franco's character didn't get killed, but he killed the Gucci Mane character. And then he went and he showed up at some sort of little Christian hangout, romantically changing his life up, and so it had a true romance sort of ending to it. So he went and got Selena Gomez because she was sort of the innocent. It could have been one way that could have been a better narrative to the change. So the third act is where it went a little south on you.
Well, I think that, and as we keep going, I just want to also say that just because I find faults in movies that I don't necessarily respond to, that doesn't mean that you can use that fact that I wrote The Canyons as proof that I'm not allowed to, okay? So actually, The Canyons was a movie, along with The Bling Ring, that Spring Breakers was routinely lumped with as each movie opened throughout 2013, a kind of triptych about immoral young Americans. And The Canyon, though, doesn't really give up on the power of narrative, whether you like that narrative or not. And to a lesser extent, neither does The Bling Ring. And yet Spring Breakers does. It believes in the power of montage, which you can find interesting or be somewhat bored by. There are no sustained scenes in Spring Breakers.
I started to wonder if it was intentionally to appeal to the short attention of the youth culture of television. How if something lasts more than 15 seconds, a lot of people can't keep attention span theater long enough for it.
Well, no, you're right. I
didn't know if that was intentional or if it's a default in the editing or if it's in the screenplay. You can never know. In the end, I'd watch the movie again. Actually, I think I went and watched it again. It definitely has its entertainment value. I think the showcase of the whole movie is the James Franco part.
Well, yeah. The high point is James Franco as the wannabe rapper alien.
Oh, my shit.
Amusing mom without looking at all of his shit. And I have to give props to a movie where James Franco gives a fairly realistic-looking blowjob to a pistol. But those moments are really disconnected from the narrative. They're moments and not connected to a movie that is being, for lack of a better word, told. It also didn't feel that it. I also felt that Spring Breakers didn't go as far as it should have. There was actually very little, if any, nudity from the stars, and I felt kind of mildly chaste.
Was it because we're all underage?
I don't care.
No, that's true.
I really don't care.
No, I don't either. I agree with you. It's.
If you're going to go there, just go there. And bikinis are fine, but still,
yeah.
There needs to be a little bit more.
Piranha 3D, for example, had, similar amount of same Spring Break type of nonsense going on. But I think that a couple rules that I always have when it comes to liking movies or even making a song. When I make a song, don't make a beat that confuses strippers. Because it won't work. When you have a movie, somebody either has to be having sex in it in a way that you can attach to it, like romantically, or the tension of sex wanting to happen, but not just blatant, rampant, or not like Clint Eastwood, I think, invented rape rape revenge movies, technically, with Outlaw Josie Wales. But, I mean, sex, like romantic, passionate, of some sort of something.
Well, but Spring Breakers reminded me of a much better and skankier film, which was Larry Clark's Bully. And maybe it's just that Larry Clark is a much bigger perv than Harmony, and so it felt less fake in a way. I mean, the sex scenes in Bully were certainly much more explicit among its film cast, and they were, I think, actually a turn-on. I thought everything in Bully was kind of erotic in a way that Spring Breakers wasn't in its kind of beer commercial visuals. But also the other thing, Billy also had a script that kept building. And yeah, I know it's based on a true story, but it also had an enveloping sense of horror and dread. And Spring Breakers ends with a massacre with a high body count that seems just kind of shrugged off.
It seems a little pointless body count.
So fleetingly portrayed in a music montage that you're not even clear on what happened or why it happened.
Yeah.
Just images to music. But
I
but you could argue that that's the point.
No. Well, no, I wouldn't argue that's the point. That was just one of the things I was thinking while watching it. But if we think about other like Gummo and things like that, that movie could be considered random montages and things like that. But it did have a narrative going through it. Well, that changed it, and that was a different type of movie, more avant-garde. But I watch Gummo. I'll watch Gummo over and over again, and those actors, the actors didn't distract or take away, or they fell into the story. So I agree with the importance of. I don't know. When I watch a movie, I really want to walk away feeling like it had a point to it. That okay. When I'm going to cry, like we're watching The Notebook, like a bunch of sissies or something, which I did cry when I watched The Notebook. I did because my mom's ill. So, I mean, but, whose isn't?
My mom wasn't ill, and I went to see The Notebook in a theater, and it was so packed that I had to sit in, like, the front row. And
that's bad.
And I was the only man in the theater. I was
never admit this.
I was at a matinee, and I was the only man in a sold-out theater. And that moment, and I found myself getting caught up in it and kind of moved. And there's that moment at the end where Jenna Rollins realizes, "Oh, it's you, you," and the entire audience started wailing. And I turned around at this massive wail coming towards me, and then I started wailing too.
You mean like Orca?
Well, it sounded kind of like Orca, but
did you see that Blackfish? Sorry, I didn't mean
I haven't seen Blackfish.
It's interesting,
but I did see Orca many times.
I did too.
As a 12 or 13-year-old. Yeah,
Daryl Hannah's leg gets bit off. I just remember that.
Yeah,
and it's ironic because she played a porpoise in the other movie,
a mermaid.
Sperm Maid. In Splash.
Right.
Daryl Hannah also has a prosthetic pinky finger. One time she hit on me, and in my mind, because I collect prosthetics for whatever reason, my wheels are spinning, and I'm going, should I just like go home with her, have sex to her, and then steal her pinky finger? This was so that I could tell you right now at this day. I was just trying to imagine the future that I knew that I could tell you, here's Daryl Hannah's pinky finger right after we had that conversation, and I didn't do it. So I feel bad for not. You're very lucky. You really dated a lot of attractive women. I didn't date. No, I didn't date her. I mean, not that I'm saying you dated Daryl Hannah, but I don't know. I was having a conversation. You just confuse them. That's all you got to do. Patrick Bateman. Who was I with the other? Oh well, whatever. I mean, we can get into that, that later. I don't know if I want to mention certain. Yeah, I don't get sensitive about the past. It's just the present and future. Always gets upset by the past. Well, I guess if that makes any sense. Well, I guess maybe before we move on to certain women you've dated, I just want to get back to this one thing you mentioned. Go back, sorry. And it was really interesting. You were talking about like this YouTube culture that we're in, that people now watch snippets of things, 2 minutes here, 2 minutes there, all of it disconnected, and that's how some people are beginning to respond to long-form narrative. And this is the future. But it's weird. I sat through a pretty good movie last week. The Hunger Games Catching Fire. The Hunger Games sequel, Catching Fire. I'm serious. It was the best American movie I've seen this fall. Really? With large-scale action sequences that were beautifully done, and there's this
destruction derby at the end of the movie that kind of deconstructs the Truman Show ending, and it's just very spectacular and beautiful. And it was in a fairly crowded theater, and the movie is about 2.5 hours long, and the audience was completely rapt. They sat there entranced, and it reminded me of when I would see the Harry Potter movies with audiences that were much younger, that were like just children, and you could hear a pin drop during the 2.5 hours those movies lasted. The kids were completely spellbound, no talking, no running up the aisles, just children reacting to a fairly complicated long-term narrative experience that they found completely immersive. So sometimes
they set up some characters that you're drawn to. You have to really be drawn to the characters in the first act.
Those are two unique movies too. The Hunger Games franchise and the Harry Potter franchise, right, are two things. But it was just interesting that I do believe that every now and then that we are, living in this kind of fragmented culture where we can only pay attention for so long. I know that sometimes it affects me as well, but every now and then something comes around where it argues against that.
I agree with that. I think that actually episodic television is the new form of cinema, because if you do it right, if you have, from the shows that I've liked, and so I'm such a fan of some of the shows. I go and I force my way into being on them. Like if you go in the comedy side, like Eastbound and Down, it's the character. Everyone likes to see an underdog, or someone likes to see a comeback, or some renaissance, or something. Everyone wants to see the hopefulness in somebody. They want to see. My opinion on I'll continue with the other stuff about like Dexter or something like Sons of Anarchy, shows that I watched Lost, but I didn't watch it like when it was happening. If I did, that would have tormented me to wait that long to get to the end.
Right.
I burned through it in like a weekend or something on tour.
Right.
But I think that episodic television, if it's done right, it's like a long form. It almost reminds me in a way like how you some of your books will read, like they have these important chapters that do have tangents, but these tangents end up going somewhere important. They reference themselves later.
Right.
And I sort of believe that there's a combination between this YouTube culture and the fact that then there's TV shows like Tosh.0 that talk about the YouTube video clips. It's like or
The Soup or Joe McHale, right? Yeah,
it's like a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox, just kind of repeating itself. But I think that's something that is worth looking into. It's almost like graphic novels, or it's almost like a podcast. It's like the old days of either rock and roll or radio, or anything. The cliffhanger. You're waiting for the next week. So there's, if a movie that's in a theater is well made. The other part of it is that I think that I've tended to see a lot more violence, well shot, and a lot more better story progression and acting in a lot of TV shows more than I have in movies recently.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, I'm not yet there. I'm not a proponent that TV is necessarily better than movies yet. No.
I don't consider it necessarily to be TV, because the way I watch stuff is I have a projector up on my wall, so it all kind of looks like a movie to me when I watch it. But the quality of the cinematography and the ballsiness of it, because a lot of times they do more edgy things within the confines of television. It's like when you only have like a pen and paper, you're confined to just that. You don't have all these extra things that you can mess with, which end up diluting what you could do. The limitations make more creativity sometimes.
Look, I completely agree with you. I think there is this tend toward pushing decency in movies, making characters decent and, and victims. A big thing in movies right now is the victimization of characters, and audiences responding to that or seeing themselves mirrored in these victims as heroes. And in television, the most interesting main characters really aren't that, whether it's Don Draper, whether it's Kevin Spacey's character in House of Cards.
Yeah, I love that show.
They're kind of like, they are morally complex people that you would never be allowed to put into a big budget movie. It's just not really possible anymore.
And that's what's exciting about it, is that what people don't realize is that the hero traditionally in a Hollywood movie, the hero or even in literature or whatever it is, wherever it starts at. The hero is technically the character that is very linear, just stays. He does one thing. He might do it at the end, but he does it because he's supposed to. His moral compass isn't necessarily gauged on emotion. The anti-hero or the villain, which I've always identified with in any movie, is now become sort of more of the anti-hero, where it's someone where they've got flaws like a real person like us. They have the feelings. They want to kill people sometimes. They want to break. They're more like outlaws. So a lot of these characters that I find in new television shows are sort of villains, but they're more like real people than the hero is, because you need the villain as the catalyst for the change. Because the world won't change without the villain, because the villain will break the rules. The hero won't break the rules.
You're making me think about something. You're making me think again, a movie that I'm always going to be mentioning on this podcast called The Canyons, that I wrote, directed by Paul Schrader, available today on Blu-ray and DVD. You're making me think about that, because when I was dealing with James Dean, who stars in The Canyons, he was offered the script. And there are two guys in The Canyons. There's the murderous, evil producer/pimp, and then there's the good, out-of-work actor who's a victim in a way. And James said, there's absolutely no way in hell I'm going to play the good kid. I have to play the evil guy, because he's just obviously just so much more interesting because he's evil. Now, as the writer of it, I was kind of interested in the good guy because I thought he was more morally conflicted, more gray, more
underdog. An underdog,
yeah, kind of an underdog in a way.
Because he's out of work.
Yeah, he's out of work, and he's with a girl who's never going to be with him because he wants to be with a rich guy, and
he's got ambition and hopes for the future.
Right. And so and it's interesting, even talking with actors in other movies that I've been involved with, that they want to play those roles. They don't want to play the good guy. But ultimately, in American movies, and at least big budget American studio movies, decency prevails. And there is no way to really, except for very, very, rare occasions. I'm probably thinking of Leonardo DiCaprio in the upcoming Scorsese movie, The Wolf of Wall Street, where you can, when you're protected by that kind of power of the filmmaker in the studio to play those kind of characters. But it was interesting because I realized, even with someone like James Dean, who was not an actor, had only done pornographic movies, that this still appealed to him. The idea of that character, the Joker versus Batman, people respond to that a lot.
They respond. You remember the villains more often. For example, the devil. Yeah, it starts with the Bible. The Bible is sort of. It's funny to me that the Bible is not considered like a very violent screenplay, since it has everything. It's got incredibly violent. It's got the devil, it's got Lucifer, it's got Satan. All three are different characters, anyways, but they never get that right. It's got like demon possession. It's got killing giants. It's pretty much got everything you need. It's more violent than anything. It's also the biggest selling book in the history of mankind. Merchandise is up on that, crucifixes. Jesus is a half-naked guy hanging nailed to a cross, and then people wear that around their neck, and then those are the people that are upset about violence in movies. It's almost really backwards. But I was reading something. I like to read a lot. I skim most of the time, but just the New Testament versus the Old Testament. The New Testament was specifically designed as a tool to control, the public. It was more of a propaganda tool, because, it's like who invented the internet, who actually wrote the Bible, where did these things come from? They're all like Santa Claus in a sense, where fear dominates. That's why, what the horror films were first invented was so that a guy could take a girl on a date and she would scream and cry and hold him, and then he would probably get a hand job, or make out with her. And it's the same thing why when I was a kid I would go to a rock and roll concert, because I'd want to go pick up girls. And the girls go there because they want to have sex with the band. And then so sometimes you luck out as the nerdy guy who just happens to be the fill-in for that. And then later in life, that it sort of affects your pattern of thinking. But
I just remember, I forced myself to read. Now, I'm completely not religious at all. Wasn't raised religiously. My parents were, I wouldn't say atheists, but it just did not play a part in my upbringing. But I got to a point as a writer where I was interested in the Bible, and I wanted to read the Bible. Mm-hmm. And so I did. I remember I spent a couple of months, and I read the entire Bible. And when I started telling people this, I was asked, I remember being asked, so did you read the Old Testament or the New Testament? And I had no idea what they were talking about. I simply didn't know. And I still don't. I know that I just read, a Bible. And
the New Testament has the very misconstrued apocalypse and Armageddon and all that, which is, again, another element that is in a lot of cinema. But technically, the rapture, this concept that all the good people will just disappear one day when Jesus comes like a thief in the night, was sort of a propaganda, 20th century invention by televangelists, because it's not in the Bible. Actually, there's no Antichrist in the Bible. And yet, in parentheses, Marilyn Manson says, I've made a record called Antichrist Superstar. That probably would explain why people get mad at me sometimes, obviously. So I'm not, when you sometimes to be a pioneer, you have to take a couple arrows in the back. That's how people invented, the internet and outer space and podcasts and your glasses and Bret Easton Ellis's. And when I go to, I'm going to tangent now. I think the absence is kicked in. I just remember watching American Psycho with one of my aforementioned ex-girlfriends, Rose McGowan, and she was very, very appalled by my enjoyment of it. And
really, Rose was.
Oh, she was appalled by it. As I was sitting in the back, and there weren't a lot of people in there, and I'd say the bulk of the crowd was. This was like actually a matinee. So you're wrong, sir, about me going on the date time. But I was like. Complete Cape Fear, like just ha 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 and everything, like especially with like try to get a reservation, like with the chainsaw thing. I was like ha 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 ha, and everybody turns around and looks at me like I'm the biggest asshole in the world, which I could be considered that. But I mean, it was unbelievable that I found the movie to be completely different than the book, but also both comedic, because it's impossible to make something like your book into a movie. But what they made, I think still to this day, I've bought probably 25 DVDs because on tour I'll just lose them and things like that. Mm-hmm. Then along came Apple TV and Netflix.
Right. But
I'll still buy it again. If I'm at a truck stop, I'll just buy it just for no reason. Not to be confused with American Psycho 2.
American Psycho 2. Garbage. All-American Girl with Mila Kunis. Yes, I remember just having...
garbage.
I know. That just... I mean, look, that audience that you were with must have not really gotten it, because I think the movie actually is kind of funny. I mean, one of its strengths is that that they located the humor in the book, a humor that a lot of people didn't think existed, and then kind of went with it.
Your hero, your protagonist is Patrick Bateman, and it's amazing that I mean, at least I did, and I think that's why it holds the test of time. That movie's. Like the book. But see, hopefully the movie, because now how culture is so backwards, hopefully the movie, some person will stumble across that when they're looking through horror films or something, and they'll go, oh, American Psycho, and then they'll see, if you like that, maybe you might want to click on Amazon, Bret Easton Ellis, right. American Psycho, because people don't know, like, culture is so ephemeral. Yeah. They don't remember what happened last week. You have to, that's good that this podcast idea, I think, is very relevant, because it's, and also, by the way, your voice sounds like one of those late night DJs, like, coming up next.
Well, look,
it's relevant to keep people, you have to needle them into remembering where things come from. That's what I always did when I started to write. I wanted to make things that made people think about it, like, sort of, in a way, teacher, in a weird way, like a teacher.
Right.
Maybe I should have been a teacher. I think that probably would have worked out bad for me. But
well, I just remember that I had published a piece last June or actually later than that, and probably like July or August. And it was about something that I cared about a lot, and it was about 4,000 words long, and it got a lot of attention. But I noticed when I was looking at the message boards that the meaning of the piece had gotten distorted, and I realized, people only skimmed the first half of it, or they were reading articles about the piece itself. And I realized people don't really read 4,000 word pieces anymore. They read 200, 400. And when Podcast One asked me to do this, I was thinking, do I really want to do a podcast show? And then I realized, well, yeah, I do, because as Tina Brown infamously just said as she was leaving her post at the Daily Beast, saying, look, no one wants to read long-form content anymore. People want to hear conversations. It resonated with me in a way. And I said, you know what? This might be the best forum to express your ideas and opinions right now.
It is. It also sort of relates to the episodic television series, as, because you have so much in your head when you write a book, so much detail, so much elaborate, some people, like tangents. So your brain fires off things. Mine probably is just even more chaotic because I'm thinking of something different at all times. I'm footnoting myself in my brain. And I think like long form things, like a podcast, it's like a radio show. It's sort of like, Elvis, put out 45 with a B-side. Didn't put out a whole record at the same time. It's sometimes it's a waste. People, when I buy something now, even myself, I'll hear something in a movie or a TV show, and I'll hit Shazam and I'll download it, just the song, because I liked it, mostly because I liked it in the scene in the movie. So I think that there's a passion for visual, and in a different, can misuse and dispose of visual qualities, which I could be guilty for by making music videos, which I hate making music videos now, in the sense that they were made in the past, because they were so limited to being more of a commercial for a song, which is okay, but why not just tell, and I hate when people try to tell a story in a music video. Why don't you just do a short film? Why don't you just get like Boonwell, get some Unchained Andalou on the stuff, and just change the game, just change how things are done. I just made 9 new songs, and I worked with a guy that scores movies, this guy Tyler Bates, and he scored, like The Watchmen, a lot of big movies. He's a completely different approach, and it sounds more like a movie. And I've always written songs and records thinking of as a movie, because I love movies so much. So it sucks when you see people denigrate and just besmirch. I just use those 2 words just for you. The style of cinema. I'm a fan of Alfred Hitchcock's, and I put Cox on there just. His whole approach to movie making, that it's he invented the tension, but it's all about the cliffhanger. But more importantly, did you ever watch the Alfred Hitchcock show?
No, of course I did. Yeah,
yeah,
I did.
And he has a record called Music to be Murdered By, with a hatchet in his hand. And I have that on vinyl, not because I collect vinyl, just because I found it. And I'm thinking, I get blamed for Columbine type stuff, and this is where it started. I'm like, I'm just gonna want to put out the exact same cover and see what happens. But or just start selling. You just go. I always found it funny that cinema, books, movies, music, video games, whatever, get blamed for the way people behave. That should really give artists more power to realize that you're technically more powerful than politicians, and we're in this weird shift, this paradigm where nobody knows what to believe. CNN, Fox, whatever. I think Dubai News is probably the most believable one, but you don't know what to believe. So it's when you go to bed at night, what do you think of, a song or a movie, or like what was on CNN?
Well, it depends. I don't want to get angry before I go to bed, and I don't want to think about the sentimental narrative in American culture right now, which distorts continuously news events. And for example, today, I think Alec Baldwin talked about how the super sensitive gay, bullying confluence, including GLAAD, officially got him fired from, his talk show because they took out of context something that he said in a fit of anger during a 5-second, brawl, more or less. And they did latch onto it, and they added this sentimental narrative about victimization, that if you say cocksucker, and if that you automatically are making a homophobic statement, and therefore it's hate speech.
A lot of people suck cocks.
No, I know. Look, I think being called a cocksucker is probably a compliment to most people.
I think it is. I mean, if you're prolific at it,
yes. But if you're using it the way that Alec Baldwin used it, as just in a blare of anger of a certain man of his generation, it's very difficult to make that leap that this was hate speech. Yet somehow they succeeded in doing it. And they latched on to the victimization narrative that's so big in American culture right now, and they made people believe it. And so if you're asking me what I think about before I go to bed at night, I don't want to think about that. I'd rather think about Hitchcock movies. I'd rather think about songs I've listened to that day. We
don't want to think about any Baldwin's cocksucking.
Right. No, we don't want to think about that.
But so this is like just it's all about context and how people. I've always known that from the beginning. It's really the reason why I started a band called Marilyn Manson. It was at the time it was what I was watching on television. It was sort of the dawn of the Donahues. The Dawn of the Donahues dead. But just the whole idea of where people were on there and they were showing their victimizations. And I went on a Donahue show and they lured me on there and then tried to blame me for like some kid who was at a concert that wasn't even related to me. And I said, well, it's a sign of the apocalypse. And I just sort of went with it. But it's almost like we've come, everything goes in cycles, but I think everything goes back to the basic man's nature.
Yes.
The what mankind is made of. And I just thought of an idea when you were saying about the bullying and the fighting in schools. What if we created a whole scenario where the gymnasium goes back to Roman times, but we'll throw in some Spanishness to it. Mm-hmm. It's a new word. I just made up Spanishness. And we have bully fighting, and we have bulls. And bullies have to fight. They have to be conquistadors or troubadours or the guys with the red capes. What are those called?
They're called matadors. Matadors.
It's at a door at the end of it. The doors.
But it's interesting that you bring that up because we were talking.
It'd be a good show.
I was talking earlier.
Bullies Gone Wild.
I was talking earlier about the Hunger Games, Catching Fire, and why I think this is it means so much to a huge swath of a generation, that it might be connected in some way to bullying, that it might be connected in some way to not themselves necessarily being bullied, but just the general bullying alienation you feel.
The proletariats, and right. You can be bullied in more ways than physically. You can be bullied financially. You can be bullied mentally. You can be bullied, discriminated against for something that you may or may not have done. Just people, actually, I've always said about things like the misuse of the word prejudice and discrimination and things like that. Prejudging something is often confused with, for example, if you put your hand on a stove and it burns your hand, the next time you see a stove, you might be prejudiced to not put your hand on the stove. That's just being that's being pragmatic and learning from your experiences. It doesn't mean that all stoves are going to burn you, but that one stove that burned your hand, maybe you don't want to put your hand on it again.
Well,
right?
Yeah, no, but I also felt that way about being bullied as a kid. I learned a lot.
Oh, I got my ass kicked like it was my job.
I totally got my ass kicked, but I learned from it. I learned a lot of things from being bullied, and I learned not only how to act covert, I learned how to maneuver myself through the world. I knew where to go, where not to go. Look, it's just life in a way. And
survival.
I survived, right.
Law of the jungle.
I survived. And yet what's so interesting now in, again, the victimization culture of bullying, these kids do not seem equipped to deal with, and I'm not talking about even physical bullying. I'm talking about
cyberbullying,
cyberbullying, which leads.
That is the funniest thing I've ever heard of. Though. I mean, it's true though.
It is true, but
that's why I don't. That's why I don't read message boards. I stopped doing that like in 1998 because if you read, it's almost being like God or Santa Claus. And if you hear the thoughts of every single person, they think that just because you have an avatar doesn't mean you have you have a persona doesn't mean you have personality. If you're sitting there, literary criticism used to be an art form, and it still can be, and that's why you like to write essays, as do I. But people just randomly, just typing whatever they want, just criticize. My philosophy is freedom of speech doesn't come with a dental plan. So say it to my face, and maybe we'll have a different way. I dare you to say it to my face. If you can, I will listen. I'm all ears.
But you want to know something? If you do hit up one of those haters on a message board, they usually will say, "Oh man, is it really you? I'm so sorry. I really didn't mean that." It's just the language. It's just the way we are.
No, but it's sort of like the movie talk radio. It's like it goes back to the old. Or the movie The Fan, or there's a lot of movies over the years where, or Play Misty for Me. That's what you should worry about. Right, you're going to get some.
Jessica Walters is going to come back from Arrested Development and stalk me with a butcher knife.
But it's just no. It's. I can't let that. If you let that consume you, then you start self-censoring, which is worse than censorship. When you sit in your head and you start writing something, then you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't write that because somebody said this or that. There's a difference between being a waiter and a chef.
Yes.
If to put it on food terms for whatever reason, in an American Psycho sense, we're chefs. Right. Chefs. Chiefs.
But, but what concerns me, again, getting back to this bullying thing, is that don't you get I get a flicker of anger when I see that a young kid, has killed themselves over cyberbullying. I wonder about what environment were they raised in that they could not take it to a degree, rather than being cornered on a sidewalk or in a gymnasium and physically getting hit by a bunch of older dudes. I keep thinking, what kind of bubble were these people?
We grew up in a different era.
We did grow up in a different era, but still, it was tangible. It was physical. It was real. It was violent.
It wasn't cyber.
No, it wasn't cyber. And I'm kind of thinking, where does this kind of sensitivity start? Where does it start, harming kids in a way? Where does it start making them not get used to the idea that life is full of pain, that death is involved, that you are going to lose. You are going to constantly lose in life. You're not going to ever win at life. And you're not always going to be given medals and gold stars. And that, I think when the slightest bit of disappointment starts coming in at 10 or 11 or 12, and you become aware that kids are shitty, they say crappy things about each other, they're mean as hell, they collapse. They collapse into this thing.
They don't, spoiler alert, you die at the end.
Right.
But I think it's because if someone thinks that everything that they hold in their hand on their iPhone or their Samsung, whatever, that's what the world revolves around. And we grew up in a different era, where you used to probably pass around hand notes, in class or something like that. I got kicked out of Christian school for putting one of my grandfather's greasy, Vaseline-covered suction cup on the bottom, black tildos, at my Bible teacher's desk because I didn't want to stay there anymore. Wrong move for me, because then I went to public school, 10th grade, and got the shit beat out of me for being the kid from Christian school. My parents weren't even religious. But I did learn how getting beat up is different than getting bullied online and things like that. But at the same time, people can say things that hurt your feelings. People can criticize you. I hate the whole everything is, you can't go anywhere without someone taking a picture of you and things like that. But you know what? I always have to remind myself, I was not setting out to be an attractive or the classic, handsome man kind of persona or whatever it is in my career as a musician. And I don't think a lot of the greatest people were Bowie or Iggy Pop or Mick Jagger, but it's the two things that I think are most attractive in life are confidence and just determination, ambition, like that you see something in the future. It's when you think about the jungle, does a peacock sit around and go, should I flare my feathers today? I don't know. That line on that message board was Hakuna Matata bitching me up and whatnot. No, it just does it. It's like sometimes our flaws, I don't know if it's a built-in weakness of vanity, or I don't know if it's the culture, how it's shifted. It's the difference between how, being a rock star when I started was not being a celebrity. Now, being a celebrity suddenly is the same when you don't do anything artistically, but then I don't like being called a celebrity, although I'm stuck in the pop culture that I was criticizing in the beginning, which was you were partially involved in with your criticisms of culture and Glamorama and in American Psycho.
Right.
So the frustration could come about, but I'm not complaining about it. I'm just saying that even when you're not in high school, people could say things that hurt you, it would feed into people's desire to hurt your feelings. But basically, they just want your attention. Yeah, I think unless they really want to come and hurt you, then they would come with a baseball bat or a gun and they'd shoot you, which is also a fear of mine. It's like John Lennon or, one of my friends from Pantera, Dimebag Darrell, he actually got shot on stage, which has never happened before.
Yeah.
That really scared me because I do things that are much more shot worthy than he was a nice guy. He never did anything to anyone. I actually antagonize people. And during the whole Antichrist Superstar era for me, which I didn't expect it to, I didn't know exactly how bad it was going to be, but there were 100 cops every day with dogs for bombs because there was always bomb threats. The misfortune is those same dogs also sniff out drugs, and that's what bullied me. I just wrapped that up for you. I got drug bullied. Damn canines.
I got a question. I often talk to Bret about...
By the way, this is my producer, Adam Thompson.
The skinny Liev Schreiber. I
often talk to Bret about how his career kind of went through phases in different time periods. Mm-hmm. And I want to ask you, Manson, what would happen if your first record came out in 2013 with the way things are, the way entertainment's perceived and critiqued? Do you think it would have went over as well as it did in the 90s?
I can look at it two different ways. I can look at it in a way that's objective, because I don't know if it's part of having multiple personalities. I like how you guys both just drank at the same time. I'll just join you. Cheers up.
Cheers.
I don't. It's not me bragging or being self-aggrandized. This is being self-aware that I started out as a journalist, and I realized all the people I interviewed were not as smart as me, and it frustrated me. So I started writing articles, and I would talk about myself more in a Legs McNeil sort of way, where I found myself to be more like Hunter S. Thompson. And later in life, I became good friends with Hunter, and he was just a wildcat, But the main thing was journalism should be engaged. It's not so much journalism. I don't know. It's the way that we write. We see things and we tell stories about it. So I have to take into effect that hot topics wouldn't exist probably if I didn't exist. I didn't even understand what the word emo meant, but I probably had some part in inventing it. I didn't know it meant emotional. I thought it meant fuck emos, that place in Austin, Texas, by Southwest, that venue. So I think if I put out a record now and never put out a record before, if we're going to do some of that sort of like alternate reality thing, I don't think it would. Well, it depends on how we do it. It depends on if I could erase the past and then put out a record now, or if I had to rethink the way things were done.
Let's say you were brand new and you were just launching now.
Yeah, there's just too many things that have been done that I think that, unfortunately or fortunately, but I will take credit for. I made my mark in history, just as Bret has with American Psycho, and that had an impact on me. You can't take one ingredient out of the path of history. One thing comes from the other, and that's the problem, I think, with a lot of culture, is they don't have any idea of where things came from. in, let's say, Wikipedia or something. But that's only in America. When you go to Europe,
That's true.
that's the thing about, even just the architecture. Not everything's a strip mall in Europe. And there is a sense of history that we're lacking in America. And that was one of the things that made me mad enough to start a band, which I didn't even know how to sing. I thought, well, you know what? If you stand there with tight pants on and a microphone, someone will listen. And it magically works somehow. I don't know. But it was more about that. I just had a vision where I just wanted to be something that fucked shit up in the way that all of the people that we like in the past, just like the way he fucked shit up with literature, like the way that, Jim Morrison. What if there was no Jim Morrison? Like, you can't take something out of the equation. It's sort of like a time travel thing. If you move something, then suddenly you got like Sigmund Freud as the president, or who knows what. I just don't believe in psychiatry, so let's just make that no. Psychology, yes. Psychiatry, no.
You don't like the medicine?
No, it's just an opinion. I think that I think then that ties into what you're saying. I think that it's all about, and it's not about like putting your kid on Ritalin and things like that. Which, if I started talking about that, I'd sound like a Scientologist.
Right.
But it's about building into someone's concept. That's why. So the first and only time I went to rehab, I went to Promises, because I was feeling a little down and out, a little bummed out, and everyone didn't realize that, I never really drank or did drugs until I was like 23, which makes me sound sort of not cool as a rock star, technically, and so I was just mentally I was in a bad mode because I didn't know. I was frustrated on how do I go from here when I just made something. It was right after Columbine happened. I wasn't sad about that, because why should I be sad about it? Like, my dad was in Vietnam. He killed a bunch of people. The government said it was okay, so that makes it all right. I don't know. So a bunch of kids get shot out of school, and they didn't even like my music. They probably thought it was too sissy, technically. And so everyone turns their back on me at that point. And first of all, my first thought was, why aren't you worried about what I would do? Like, if you think that my music would cause a problem, why aren't you worried what I would do? I actually learned how to use a rifle when I was 6 years old, because my dad, who was in Vietnam for the United States of America, taught me how to use it. So I started to get into I don't know if it's depression. Who knows? These are all words that are created by psychiatrists. So I decided to take everyone's advice and just go to Promises, which I still have a $30,000 non-transferable gift certificate, which I would give to you.
I might want to use it.
Take it, Brett.
No, it's non-transferable. That's the problem. So I was there for like 3 weeks, and I technically got kicked out. Sort of. Well, they bullied me to kick me out, because the only person I became friends with after 3 weeks was a 90-year-old woman. It's never polite to ask a woman her age. I guess that's what I was told when I was a kid. Or hit a woman with glasses. So I always carry around glasses so I don't hit women, because I'm not a woman hitter. And so I just sit down and I'm having my daily meal at Promises Rehab. And this 90-year-old woman, I said, so why are you here? And she said, well, my children thought that I should come here. And I said, I just saw them confiscate your hairspray. Why'd they do that? They said, well, they thought I would be inhaling it. I'm like, you're 90. If I was 90, I'd be inhaling hairspray on the regular. They should have either bought you a coffin or like a shit ton of fucking heroin and hairspray and just said, may God be with you. She's like, I know, right? And then they told me I was a bad influence on everyone. This is about 7 or 8 years ago. So then here comes the punchline. So my dad, I called up and I said, Dad, this isn't for me, right? This God, or if you don't want to be God, it could be some other higher power. I want a power to get higher type of thing. And my dad came and retrieved me from Promises in Malibu. And after 3 weeks, and That's almost like 28 Days, like Sandra Bullock, which I always thought 28 Days Later was a remake of the Sandra Bullock movie where she turned into a zombie. That would have been funny. But so my dad, when we did shots of whiskey, my dad never drank before. We did shots of whiskey in the piss test cups. And the main thing was that right before I left, it was almost like a John Malkovich door, like in being John Malkovich. It was a small door. He said, okay, but before you go, will you just hear us out? After they already told me they wanted me to leave because I was a bad influence on the 90-year-old lady who was born in she invented drugs. Like, so a lot of people misconceive that older people, like our grandparents, are conservative. They invented butt fucking and drugs, and we didn't invent it. They did it way before we did, right? So they're not conservative. They're just like mad that they can't do it anymore. That's pretty much it. So they opened this door and they said, could we get, this is like 7 years ago, so keep in mind the time frame. Out of this door comes Charlie Sheen. Charlie Sheen. The Charlie Sheen. Way back then. But he looked like he had orange newscaster makeup on. He looked really unusual. But he came out of this tiny door, like, I don't even know where I was. And he's like, he put his hand on my leg, sitting on the bed. Not in a provocative manner, but he's like, listen, man, I've been here. I stayed here for like 700 days. I'm like, this is right already the worst sales pitch you could ever have. Charlie Sheen. In my mind, I'm just listening, just laughing. So I knew that I could tell you the story later. That's usually why I do things. So later I could tell the story. And they tried to use Charlie Sheen to keep me to stay into rehab after they told me to get out from the 90-year-old lady. And then what happened to Charlie Sheen is comedy. That's so strangely ironic that I find it amusing. So I left, and I met David Bowie once, and I asked him. I said, "What was the first question I asked Bowie was, you had your era, Berlin era, with Low and all that stuff, where drugs and ups and downs. I go, what was your secret, key to this?" He said, "I just got bored with it." So my philosophy, if I have to give some Confucius says, is drink and do drugs when you're in a good mood, not when you're in a bad mood. Don't do heroin because you'll probably die. Don't do crystal meth, your teeth will fall out. They can't all be lumped together. It's like it's a little basic pragmatism.
Thanks for listening to the Bret Easton Ellis Podcast. Next week, I'll have part 2 of my conversation with Marilyn Manson. So check that out at podcast1.com. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
The Bret Easton Ellis Podcast.